everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Van Badham and I have the great honour of being the chair of the Queen Victoria Women's Centre Trust, the trust that manages this beautiful building that we're in right now. Please, if you can be seated, if you can maybe turn off a slightly more La Cucaracha themed ringtone to your phone in the interests of...
I am a Mati Mati and Wamba Wamba woman, so my mob is from northwest Victoria over the border into New South Wales. And I can tell you a little bit more about myself in just a second. But of course I have the privilege of being here today to acknowledge the traditional owners of country and pay our deepest respects to elders, both past, present and emerging. And it's so critical that we do this because, particularly for me as a young Aboriginal woman, I wouldn't be able to be here today if it wasn't for the fierce advocates that have come before me, both men and women, that have fought for our rights over generations. And my great-grandmother, Alice Kelly, was one of those people. And so I'll tell you a little bit about her because it's kind of why I'm a Labor person. So my Nana Kelly she was someone who still spoke language. She was the custodian of Mungo Lake when they found Mungo Man and Mungo Woman. So she was a pretty incredible woman. So, like I call her Nana Kelly, but she's on billboard. She's on the billboard at Lake Mungo. So she was a person that the archaeologists sat down with when they uncovered those remains. So they're a big part of who I am. And she would say to, when she passed away 15 years ago, she had, it was 105 great-grandchildren or something like that, just a small family. And she would say to her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren that there is power in the pen. You must learn the white man's way to be able to fight for your people. You must speak their language. And actually what she was talking about is getting an education. She was saying you must get an education. That is the best way to be able to fight for your people. And it's incredible for someone like her to say that because at the time that she was saying that, it wasn't safe to send your kids to school. Your kids were getting removed from school for being Aboriginal. And she had 11 kids, so the fact that she managed to keep those kids together at that time speaks volumes about her, the type of person that she was. And I feel like that's something that I've taken on as something that I need to do and something that I've done in my life is made sure that I've got an education, and that's a part of the reason I'm a Labor person because I'm the eldest of 6 kids. There's no way my mum could have afforded to send us to private schools. And so I'm one of those benefits of a public school education, just as my 30 cousins and the 50 million others that I've got. And it's only a Labor government that allows families like mine and communities like mine and the most vulnerable people in this country to thrive. And I think that's incredibly important, which is why I'm a Labor person. I feel like I'll leave it there and I'll hand it back over to Van now. So thank you very much for your listening ears this morning.
Thank you so much, Yana. Welcoming you to this building is welcoming you to a really extraordinary history of not only the city of Melbourne, but also the experiences of Australian women. This building was built in 1848. It was one of the first women's hospitals in the world. It had the remit, of course, to treat women for the medical conditions that they presented with, which over time came to be a record of the difference that women's policy makes to the lived experience of women and their families. In this building, one of the very first women to ever practice medicine in a hospital was admitted as a doctor. But because it was illegal at the time for women to train as doctors in the state of Victoria, she had to train in New South Wales before she came here to practice. In this building, the extremely sad and tragic story of Indigenous displacement took place. In this building, there were forced sterilisations of Indigenous women, part of a racist campaign of smothering the history and reality of this continent on which we live. This is a building in which pregnant women had their babies taken away from them because they were considered incapable of parenting themselves. And this is also a building where, very sadly, a lot of women came to die because their inaccessibility to basic reproductive health care, the illegality of abortion in the state of Victoria drove desperate women to desperate circumstances that ended their lives. But this building was preserved in the 1990s by an incredible feminist campaign, because as we strive for that particularly pink light on the hill of female equality, we must remember the sisterhood and the support and the experiences of women's communities that gathered around this building, providing healthcare and social care and outreach. And as a building, we're very proud to host organisations that to this day support women who are in terrifying and isolated circumstances of domestic violence. We support the Council of Single Mothers and their Children, who provide support to women who are raising families. We support cancer organisations like Counterpart that support women in some of the most desperate moments of their lives. Ovarian cancer is here. Emily's List, which is, of course, a very proud member of the organization. And it's with that history in mind that we're very proud to host this policy launch today, because the reality of women in Australia is that we bring our history with us, the history of exclusion and marginalisation, all the different intersectional differences that women experience, whether they're from their communities, their class, their ethnic background, their Indigenous background, their disability status. All of these things come into this building to be part of the history that we acknowledge and accept, and also a vision of a future going forward, and acknowledging our past and seeing the potential of all women to realise equality and to have the opportunity in their individual and social lives to thrive. It's very exciting also to support the Australian Labor Party launching their policy, given the Labor Party's commitment to women's policy, not only as an expression of government, but also as an expression of the internal politics of the party. It is fantastic to have a party in here, for example, that thinks it's actually important to pre-select women in winnable seats. Yeah. It's extraordinary for me to think that in 2019 there is a political party going to this election that has literally pre-selected more white men called Adam for winnable seats than it has women. And of course we are in the city of Melbourne, and I'm talking about the Greens. It's fantastic to support a party whose leadership team has continually shown bravery around issues of dealing with domestic violence and violence against women, who are courageous in the way that they support women and are fantastic advocates for women. And some of the men in the Labor Party are pretty all right too. So please give a huge round of applause for someone who typifies the kind of bold, brave women's leadership that we identify with the Australian Labor Party, and that is the Deputy Leader, Tanya Plibersek.
Isn't Van Badham just the best? And Jana, could you stand up again, please? That was just the most beautiful, We are so lucky to have you as a candidate, and so fortunate that you can share the story of your Nana Kelly with us today. Thank you very much for that. And I want to join with everyone in the room in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today and paying my respects to elders past and present. Now, I've got quite a few colleagues here today and I'm really nervous I'm going to miss one out. So what I'm going to do is ask all of our federal MPs and senators to stand up. And do we have any state MPs with us today? Okay, then I'd like to ask our federal candidates to stand up, please. Now, just indulge me for a sec. Let's get the candidates and the MPs and senators to stand up at the same time, because this is actually the group that we want to see in Canberra after the next election. Today I'm here with this united Labor team to say that equality doesn't happen by accident. Even though it's 2019 and equality is long overdue, the fight for equality requires leadership, commitment, drive and of course resources. In the time that I'm talking to you, police will be called to more than 3 domestic violence incidents across Australia. On average, 1 woman a week is murdered by a current or former partner. Yesterday, I woke up to the front page headline, "Father pleads guilty to family massacre." Mara Harvey, her 3-year-old daughter Charlotte, her 2-year-old twins Alice and Beatrix, and her mother Beverly were stabbed to death. Today, we awoke to another murder, Natalina Ungok. The names of these women stay with me, the names I've heard all my life: Janine Balding, Anita Cobby, more recently here in Melbourne, Eurydice Dixon, whose rapist and murderer is on trial today. How many more women just living their lives will lose their lives to their partner, to their former partner, to some stranger who follows them on the street? And what does it do to the rest of us? How do we change our behaviour? How do we restrict ourselves, tell our daughters not to go out at night, lie awake waiting for them to come home? Elevated heartbeat as we're walking home ourselves, listening intently for footsteps behind us. It affects the behaviour of all women, because all women carry this subtle fear of violence around with us every single day. I want the culture of this country to be a culture where no Australian fears violence, where no Australian fears violence. Ending violence against women and their children has to be a national priority, and as an opposition we've made some very important commitments already. Linda Burney has been leading our work in this area, and she has done an absolutely magnificent job already. Commitments like our $88 million for a safe housing fund, the flexible financial support when it's needed, 10 days paid domestic violence leave, 250,000 additional National Rental Affordability Scheme properties over a decade, so that there is a place for people who are fleeing violence to go as they rebuild their lives. We've made commitments to important legal services too, and it's wonderful to have Mark Dreyfus here today. I'm very proud to announce, in addition to all of these existing commitments, that a Shorten Labor government would invest $62 million in local grants for family violence prevention initiatives. Local services are the front line of support and protection at times when women are at their most vulnerable. They are the trusted services within each of our communities that deliver programs for women and kids. They provide outreach for culturally and linguistically diverse groups and First Nations victims of violence. Services like the ones that many of you who are in this room today have worked in or supported all of your lives. Too often, victims of family violence are let down by our social security system. The Liberals' cuts to the Department of Human Services have made this much, much worse, with people waiting for hours on hold, on telephone lines, or giving up altogether. To make sure that Centrelink can better help women and children escape family violence, Labor will invest in 25 family violence specialists to make sure that victims of violence won't have that experience of being put on hold for hours at a time, so that their safety is our first priority. And we'll make sure that there's a dedicated family violence phone line where people can get immediate advice and support. We know that if you're leaving a violent relationship, keeping up with the paperwork is probably not top of the list of priorities for you. So we'll also work with Centrelink to allow people escaping family violence up to 4 weeks to claim crisis payment, because anybody at their time of crisis should get the support they need. We know the importance of responding to violence, to giving help to people when they need it, but of course, preventing the violence in the first place is so important too. We need to break down those attitudes that lead to violence in the first place. So a Shorten Labor government will invest $35 million over 3 years to deliver respectful relationships education in more than 3,000 Australian schools. Because schools, as well as being places of learning, are often the first place that kids form serious bonds with people outside their family. They're where respect and equality can be modelled, shaping the attitudes and behaviours that our children will take into their adulthood. Respectful relationships education equips young people to form safe, healthy relationships when they're ready to, and to treat their peers with respect. I'm a mother of 3 children, 2 of them are teenagers at the moment, and I do worry so much about the information that teenagers are getting about relationships. So much of it is coming from bad sources, damaging sources, early viewing of online pornography, sexting, the sort of social media and negativity that we hear so much of today. More respect and better behaviour in our schools also means a better learning environment for our kids and better long-term student outcomes. Ending violence and economic independence go hand in hand too, and that's why we've already announced that will take action to close the gender pay gap, that will support... Yeah, it is important, that's right. And of course the superannuation gap as well. We've committed $400 million for that. We'll make sure that all our girls, but our First Nations girls in particular, get better mentoring to have a successful experience through school and go on to TAFE or university or work after school as well. We'll make sure that our health system supports women too, with our first ever National Sexual and Reproductive Health Strategy to give all Australian women access to safe and affordable reproductive health services. And of course, we'll drive down the cost of cancer treatment, breast scans and so on. We didn't just make this stuff up. These policies, you've all got the booklets in front of you. You see that I've only covered a fraction of them in my remarks today. They have come out of extensive work by our Status of Women Committee, particularly under the leadership of Sharon Claydon. The Status of Women Committee have travelled all over Australia. They've talked to thousands of women, and more importantly, they've listened to thousands of women. That's how we develop policy. We've got the best policies because of that consultation during the 6 years that we've been in opposition. But we also, as well as having the best policies and the best Status of Women Committee, the best members of Parliament, the best candidates, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? We've also got the best leader. Bill has been a supporter of women's equality ever since I've known him. Every conversation we've had in public and most importantly in private, he has told me how important gender equality is for him and how important it would be for him as Prime Minister. In contrast, we've got Scott Morrison out there saying, on International Women's Day no less, that it's not a good idea for women to get equality because it might come at the expense of men, and that the discussion of women's reproductive health was divisive, apparently. Not really sure why. We've also, of course, got Michael McCormack, and for those of you who don't know, he's the leader of the National Party and also the Deputy Prime Minister. But Michael McCormack, who said, and truly this is no joke, when he was asked whether the Nationals have a problem with women, he said, no, both of our women are ministers. Well, both of them are. It is likely that there will be more men named Andrew, which is wonderful, in the House of Representatives after the next election than there will be Liberal women. It is likely that there will be more men named Andrew in the House of Representatives after the next election than there will be Liberal women.
It's a shame.
We in contrast, if we are successful at winning this next election, we'll hit our 50-50 target 6 years ahead of schedule. Woo! And I think a lot of you were at that national conference, not the last one, the one before, where we set that 50-50 target. And you'd remember it was actually Bill that was arguing for it. It's a very different Labor Party to the one I remember in 1994, where we had to fight and win that first 35% target. And it makes me so proud that everybody in this room has been part of that change. I can tell you, one of the most important elements of this change is having a leader who gets it. We don't need to lobby him about equality and women's issues. He just gets it. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Bill Shorten.
Thank you, Tanya. I want to thank you for your friendship, your advice, your support for the past 6 years. And on behalf of our movement, I'd like to thank you for your leadership, everything you've done to bring together the best women's policy, the best women's policy program that any political party has ever taken to the people of Australia. Thank you very much, Tanya. And because of Tanya, because of remarkable women like our shadow ministers, Jenny McAllister and Linda Burney and Amanda Rishworth, and of course, the one and the only, Penny Wong. And because of great members of Parliament like Lisa Chesters and Jed Carney, Joe Ryan, Kimberley Kitching, and many more. And because of outstanding candidates like Yana Stewart, who we just heard from, and Fiona McLeod running in the marginal seat of Higgins. Yay! Peter Murphy, Shireen Morris, Kate Thwaites, Jennifer Yang, and so many more who are here. Because of all of you, if we win the election on May the 18th, we will be the first government in the history of the Commonwealth with 50% women in our ranks. Well done. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And friends, I promise that if we win the election, these words of respect will be marked by action. Action on closing the gap. Action on truth-telling and treaties. And action on a voice for our first Australians enshrined in the nation's birth certificate, the Australian Constitution. This is why Labor seeks to form government. It is why I want to be Prime Minister, to turn words into action. It's what motivates every member and every candidate of our stable and united and talented team. It's why this election is so terribly important to our future, to the future of the country. It is a chance to give that great, glorious old idea of a fair go, to give it new life and new meaning for more Australians. Transforming education with universal preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old. It will be the biggest expansion of Medicare in a generation to practically eliminate the costs of fighting cancer. It will be embracing renewable energy, ending the toxic paralysis of the climate change wars, taking real action on climate change, not just passing the problem on to our children and our grandchildren. And contrast all of that, all of what we want to achieve, the plan for the future that we offer the people of Australia, contrast that with the smallness, the meanness, the narrowness of what our opponents offer. After 6 years, 3 Prime Ministers, no vision, no plan, no ambition, nothing good to say about anything, nothing but a long, dishonest list of things that they want to make you afraid of. How did we come to a state in Australian politics where the government of the day says, we have nothing new to offer you, but we want you to be afraid? Afraid of change, afraid of reform, afraid of the future, afraid of the march of women towards equality, afraid of every new idea, of every big challenge. For every new idea, for every new challenge, their answer is no. They can find an excuse to do nothing every time. They say that our country cannot afford the best possible health system. They say that we can't afford to rebuild TAFE or properly fund public schools. They say that we can't afford a manufacturing industry. They say we can't afford fair pay or a living wage. They say that Australia cannot afford to take real action on climate change. But please know this. Every time you hear the Liberals say that our country can't afford it, what they're actually really saying is they think our people don't deserve it. Now, I'm proud we take a different view. I'm proud that we have a vision that seeks to write Australia large. I'm proud that in the Labor Party we want the very best for the Australian people. I'm proud of the fact that we are launching our women's policy and it is entitled All About Equality. I am very proud that at the heart of our plan for a fair go for all Australians is our determination to achieve equality for the women of Australia. A fair go means equality in pay. A fair go means equality in opportunity. A fair go means equality in leadership. A fair go means in freedom from violence. Friends, when I became Labor leader back in 2013, I said that I wanted to make preventing and eliminating family violence a national priority. I said that we needed to deal with the hard issues as a Labor Party, not just the easy issues. And there has been no issue treated any more as difficult as violence against women. Now, I said this in 2013 for a whole lot of reasons. From the courage and remarkable inspiration of courageous Australians like Rosie Batty. I said it, and when I witnessed the groundbreaking Royal Commission initiated by Dan Andrews and the late Fiona Richardson and the Victorian Labor government, I actually think from when we spoke about it then, our country has actually come a fair way on this issue. There is a sea change in the attitude of Australians, at least in part. We don't turn a blind eye anymore. We no longer metaphorically and literally pull down the blinds, turn up the television to drown out the noise next door. We talk more openly about respect and changing attitudes. But the uncomfortable truth, the hard truth is that whilst our willingness to talk about family violence has changed, the number of deaths has not. And to be really blunt and direct, in a crisis, words do not put a roof over your head. Words don't help kids coming home at night, checking if their mother has turned on the light on the porch or not, as a quiet sign to say whether the dad is in a good mood or an angry mood. Words don't help kids in the morning and their mothers wondering where would they go? How much longer can they take it? Words don't help children at night or their mother trying to negotiate the unpredictable moods of an angry man. Is he drunk happy or is he drunk angry? Will he fall asleep at the table? Can I turn my music on in my room? Will it cause a fight? Does my mother have to physically and literally protect me from the mood of the angry man? Words are not enough. Words don't pay the bills if your partner has closed your accounts, frozen the credit card. Words don't really help, do they, when you've got to negotiate the minefield of the courts? If you're caught up in this frightening, dangerous ordeal of family violence, what you need is practical help. If you need real money, concrete support, that is why today we are announcing a $660 million commitment to prevent family violence, to fund frontline services and to help rescue survivors and their children. We can find a way in this country to pay for these things. We should be a country who can provide flexible financial support packages of up to $10,000. It should be there to help with rent on a new place, to change the locks, or just paying the bills. You shouldn't have to draw down on your superannuation, should you? Or take out a loan just to get you through a crisis. And I acknowledge the work of the Australian Union movement in influencing us to put 10 days paid leave into the national domestic leave, violence leave in the National Employment Standard. "10 days, as if people go through family violence to get a day's paid leave. It's just about helping you pick up the pieces without worrying about losing your job. There is no way a survivor can negotiate finding the new tenancy, inspecting the house, doing the paperwork, making sure the kids are okay at school, talking to the teachers, keeping an eye out for an angry and vengeful ex-partner, and not have a little bit of paid leave. And today, I can announce that a Labor government, we're going to double the funding for emergency accommodation of women refugees in our 4th action plan. Double the funding. Actually, when you look at what this government spends money on, the fact that we can just say it's an additional $60 million over the next 4 years to ensure women and children fleeing violent partners to find a safe place to stay, it's actually not that much. But it is a recognition that too often, when the very worst happens, when the end event of a chain of violence and abuse, we still hear people say, "Why didn't she leave?" When the real question we should have asked is, where could she have gone? Now, a Labor government will answer that question. We're going to put in the money to expand existing safe accommodation. We're going to build new centres right across Australia, city and country. We will work with the states to ensure that crisis accommodation is accessible for people with disability, and it's got to include facilities for the kids too. Now, friends, anyone who's been to a community legal centre, we know these places are full of remarkable people who do vital work on a shoestring budget. They don't get paid what their contemporaries from university who went into the commercial firms get paid, but what they give in terms of intellect and emotional energy is second to none. And when you look at what these community legal centres do, particularly when it comes to helping women seeking legal protection from violent partners, what an isolating experience it is for a woman to come out of a relationship to be stalked by the ex-partner. It is so tiring, from the tracking on mobile phones, to the unexpected visits, to the so-called chance bumping into in a corridor or at a supermarket. What these women need is help. And of course, no matter how dedicated the staff, no matter how passionate the law students are and the volunteers, we know that the help required on the existing resources means there are simply not enough hours in the day or dollars in the bank of the legal centre. It means that Australians, people, women, are turned away, and vulnerable women are left to navigate a confusing and intimidating and an expensive legal maze all on their own. That is why, if we are elected, Labor will invest another $42.5 million into Australia's community legal centres. And we'll provide another $21.5 million to help prevention legal services expand into growing suburbs, country towns and remote communities. I have a very simple view of Australia. Your postcode should not determine your access to justice, or indeed, no matter where you live in Australia, if you are a woman dealing with family violence, you have the same right to good advice, to quality representation and to justice in the courts. Now, I've spent most of this week in northern Queensland talking about our plans to get wages moving again in this country. You know, everything is going up in Australia except your wages. But I don't need to tell Australian women this. When you think about it, in a lot of ways, Australia's oldest political promise, Labor's oldest promise, our founding principle, is a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. But in 2019, too many women are being excluded from this promise. Not just only because of Liberal cuts to Sunday and public holiday penalty rates disproportionately affect women, not just because the Liberals' much vaunted tax plan does nothing to help millions of women working part-time, but because women earn less than men and retire with less than men. Because feminised industries have historically been undervalued and underpaid compared to traditionally male-dominated industries. And because too many working women are seeing their entire salary eaten away by the rising cost of childcare. Yet the only thing that the Liberals and Nationals have done to narrow the gap in pay between men and women in the last 6 years is just suppress the wages of all working people. The Liberals are not helping working women earn more or save more. They're just making sure that men are paid less. After 6 years of conservative economics calling the shots in Australia, it's plain enough. Equality does not trickle down. It is plain enough that the free market and the invisible hand aren't doing a good enough job. That wage stagnation is not a plan for equal pay. And the Liberals and Nationals, after 6 years, have demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt they are simply not interested in fixing it or capable of changing it. The current Prime Minister says that he doesn't mind women succeeding so long as it's not at the expense of the others. Now, unless he's talking about zebras, he means men. We have in 2019 a Prime Minister who thinks that equality is a question of special treatment. The current Minister for Women said that the Liberals are seen as anti-women. And the government's first Minister for Women was Tony Abbott. So when it comes to fair pay and conditions, it is only a Labor government that will strive for the equality that women deserve. We said that we will deliver a $400 million boost to the superannuation account balances of women and low-income earners because women should not be penalised for taking time out of the workforce to start and raise a family. And in the very near future, we will be announcing new plans to cut the cost of long-day childcare, and we will announce in the very near future a new national push for pay equity, starting with early childhood educators. And for the first time, we are going to require that big businesses publicly report the gender pay gap in their companies. We are going to ban pay secrecy clauses. At the moment, the financial services sector is one of the biggest users of pay secrecy clauses in contracts. It is arguably, therefore, no coincidence that they have the biggest gender pay gap, almost 30%. Under a Labor government, if your company is not trying to close the gender pay gap, you won't be able to cover it up any longer. And we're going to set the standard too as a government. In our very first year, every department, every agency will be required to do an audit to find out what their pay gap is and what's causing it. And we're also going to restore pay equity as a principle of Australian public service bargaining. We are going to adopt a simple principle for government departments. If not, why not? If you're not paying men and women equally, from now on you're going to have to explain why not. If not, why not? And what's more, we'll require departments to demonstrate that they have a plan to fix it. And friends, the same will go for companies seeking government contracts. If you want to bid for Commonwealth dollars, whether it is in infrastructure or procurement or technology or services, you will have to report on the gender pay gap, and you'll have to show what you're doing to close it. Because companies that are doing the wrong thing should not get a competitive advantage or a single taxpayer dollar. Friends, a few weeks ago I was campaigning in Corangamite with the remarkable Libby Coker, and we met a dairy farmer. He's a man in his late 60s. It was on the Bellarine Peninsula, and I just asked out of curiosity, as one does to dairy farmers, I said, "Did you go to Queenscliff Secondary School?" There's a reason. I don't always ask dairy farmers that. Because he was of an age, and he gave this answer, and I said, "Was his teacher Anne McGrath?" He said it was. That's my mother's name, Anne McGrath. And, you know, when your parent has passed, and you sort of wish you could replay the conversations, and you sort of kick yourself for not having had more conversations, you don't realise until too late the time isn't always there to have those dialogues. So periodically, though, you get lucky and you meet someone who knew your parent, and is almost like a voice from your parent to you via this interlocutor. And he got quite interested, and he said, Anna, and he said, he called her Annie McGrath. Annie, get your gun. I thought, oh. I know my grandfather used to shoot rabbits, but I said, why was that? And he said that my mother was a great friend of his mother, and he described his own mother and my mother, who would have been in her early 20s when she was teaching him, mid-20s. He said they were feminists before people knew what feminists were. And it is funny how a chance reflection from a stranger can make you think. My mother was a brilliant woman. She won a teaching scholarship, Catholic family, first to go to university. They weren't rich. She had to take the teacher scholarship to look after the other siblings. Don't get me wrong, she loved being a teacher and she was very good at it. But she always wanted to be in the law. Later in life, when my twin brother and I went to university, she was enrolled at the same faculty. She distinguished herself and got the Supreme Court prize. I did not. Anyway, that part was superfluous, I get you know that. But what is interesting, and when I work with such talented women every day as I do, when I've got the remarkable Chloe at my side, I realise that she was never bitter about what had happened to her. But she always felt that because of her family's financial circumstances, because of the era she grew up in, and because she was a woman, it was never assumed that she should have the same opportunity to fulfil her potential, to decide her own future. That if she had been the eldest son, with the best will in the world to my grandparents, if she had been the eldest son, I suspect she wouldn't have had to take the teacher scholarship, and I suspect she thinks that too. But this is it. She was never bitter about the lack of opportunity, and I can't fix that now. For the reason why I'm so pleased to be part of this launch and part of this movement is I can't make it better for her, and she wouldn't ask me to. But I can make it better for my own daughters. I can make it better for every Australian woman going forward, because When we as a country put restrictions upon our people's potential, we are all diminished. If we deny people opportunities because of where they live, of what their parents earn, because of their skin colour or how many generations they've been here, or because of their gender, then our whole country misses out. We're here launching a plan for equality, but equality is not about lifting someone up and forcing someone else down, as the government would have you. Equality is a recognition that in the race of life, we don't all start at the same point. That because of various discriminations and reasons, your gender, your colour, your faith, your location, your wealth, you get put further back from the starting line. Equality for me is just giving everyone the same opportunity. We must repudiate in this election the proposition that the government advances, that Labor wants some to go up, but by pushing others down. That's not right. What I want is I want everyone to have the same starting line. I don't want to see people's wasted. If we strive to ensure that every Australian, young and old, every Australian, city and bush, women and men, can get equal opportunity, nothing holds our country back. If we can achieve equality for women in Australia, real equality for women, then we will be the fairest and the richest nation in the world. Friends, I said at the beginning, our mission's all about turning words into actions. When it comes to a fair go for women, we have our words right here. We have a positive vision for the future. We don't spend our whole time sledging the government. We don't seek office merely on the argument we are not them. We seek office because we have a positive vision of the nation. We've made long-term reform decisions to pay for our plan. There's one more step, though, we need to take. We need to get out there and win the election. Let us turn our words into action. All of our candidates. We have all of our candidates up.
We might do another meeting. Focus on the stage, put Bill and the team down here, get the whole room in. Okay.
Can we get everybody to